The rain had stopped falling by evening, but the air was still heavy with dampness. The cracked pavement outside the housing block shimmered under streetlight reflections, and the wind carried the bitter smell of soaked garbage and exhaust fumes. Inside the narrow flat on the third floor, Ada sat at the edge of a thin mattress, her back straight, her legs dangling, and her fingers clenched around a cup of lukewarm tea her mother had made from reused leaves. She was 13 but looked older. Her face had the seriousness of someone who knew too much about hunger and too little about softness. The peeling walls around her were lined with old newspapers and worn religious posters. Every noise from the neighboring flats, arguments, TVs, crying babies, passed through like whispers in a paper house. Her mother, Chica, stood hunched over a basin of water, scrubbing her youngest child's school uniform. The fabric had thinned with age, and the sleeves were more thread than cotton. Her father, Jude, wasn't home yet. He worked the night shift cleaning offices in the city center. Sometimes he returned with his eyes bloodshot and shoes soaking from walking half the way when his transport money ran out. "Drink it before it gets cold," her mother said without turning. Ada drank. The tea was more water than anything else, but she didn't complain. She had learned from an early age that complaints were a luxury. The flat had 2 rooms, one barely big enough for a mattress on the floor, and another where they kept everything else. Her 2 younger siblings shared the mattress behind her, sleeping, limbs tangled like puppies. "Auntie Marianne is coming tomorrow," Chica said, her voice uncertain. Ada looked up. "From church?" Chica nodded. She didn't say much more, but Ada caught the shift in her posture, the hope. Marianne was the white woman from church who sometimes handed out second-hand clothes and smiled too much. She spoke slowly, as if making sure everyone understood she was kind. She once gave Ada a coat that smelled like another child and cologne, and it hung from her like borrowed skin. She hadn't spoken to Ada more than twice. Still, in the eyes of her mother, she was a miracle wrapped in foreign perfume. Someone who had power, influence, wealth, hope. "She wants to talk," Chica said. "She might take you to stay with her, to go to a better school. Maybe even help with university later." That word, university, felt like another country. Distant, expensive, unreal. Ada didn't speak. She swallowed the last of the tea and nodded slowly. Part of her wanted to believe it. That someone would see her. That someone might help. But another part, the part shaped by years of hunger, of school lunches skipped and worn-out shoes, whispered, "Nothing is free." Marianne arrived the next day in a sleek black car that didn't belong on their street. She wore a pale beige coat and high-heeled boots, her blonde hair perfectly smoothed. She didn't knock. She waited by the car like the building itself should come out to greet her. Chica rushed down to meet her, dragging Ada by the hand. "She's grown," Marianne said, glancing at Ada with a tight smile. "Much taller than I remember." Ada kept her eyes low. "You still doing well in school?" Marianne asked. "Yes, Good. Education is important. Very important." Her accent was crisp, her tone as polished as her coat. She turned to Chica. "I've spoken to my husband. We have space. Just 1 room, of course, but it will be enough. She can attend school with our children. I'll handle the paperwork." Tears shimmered in Chica's eyes. She began to thank her, again and again, clasping Marianne's hands as if she were touching salvation itself. Ada stood silently, watching. A knot of emotion tangled in her chest. This wasn't joy. It wasn't fear either. It was something colder. A knowing. An ache that came with pretending this was rescue, when it already felt like exile. They packed her things in a plastic shopping bag. 3 worn dresses, 2 pairs of socks, a pair of school shoes with cracked soles. Chica tucked in a rosary and a small bottle of anointing oil. Her father wasn't home yet. When they hugged goodbye, Ada felt her mother's ribs through her blouse. "Be good. Be respectful. Listen to them," Chica whispered, trying not to cry. "Make us proud." Ada nodded. She couldn't cry. She didn't want to break her mother's hope. The car was silent except for the hum of the engine. Marian didn't speak much on the drive. When she did, she asked about Ada's favorite subject, what she wanted to be, whether she knew how to do laundry. "You'll need to help a little around the house," she said. "We are all busy people. But you'll have your own bed. That's something, yes." Ada nodded. Her own bed. That sounded like a dream. The house was big. Too big. 3 floors, a garden, wide stairs, white walls. It smelled like flowers and polished wood. Ada's bag looked like garbage against the marble floor. Marianne's children didn't come to greet her. From upstairs, she heard the muffled sounds of video games. "You'll sleep downstairs, in the laundry room. It's quiet, and you'll have your own space. We'll get you a school uniform soon. For now, you'll help around the house and settle in." Ada stood in the small room, barely enough for a mattress and a basin. The washing machine clicked beside her. Her stomach was a hollow pit. She sat on the bed. Not a real bed, just a foam mat on the floor. But clean. Her own, apparently. She looked at the rosary in her hand. This wasn't rescue. It was the beginning of something else. She didn't know what, but she knew this much. It would not be easy. And no one was coming to save her. Ada woke before the rest of the house, not because anyone told her to, but because something in her spirit no longer allowed her to sleep past dawn. In her old home, waking early meant helping her mother prepare her siblings for school. Here, it was a form of armor. The earlier she moved, the less visible she had to be when the house came to life. The first morning, she washed the dishes from dinner, though she hadn't been given a plate. They'd eaten without her. She had waited in the hallway, sitting quietly until the voices died down and the lights went off. When she peeked into the kitchen later, all that remained were oily pots and plates with chicken bones and smeared sauce. She scraped what little rice she could find into her palm and ate standing up in the dark, careful not to drop a grain. The days began to blur. Marianne never shouted, but her silence cut deeper than any slap. She walked past Ada like she was part of the furniture. When she did speak, it was to remind her what hadn't been done right. "The floors are streaky," or "next time, fold the laundry neatly." The children, Nina and Lucas, made no such effort to be subtle. Nina, 12 and delicate in her cruelty, told Ada one morning, "You shouldn't wear your hair like that. It makes you look like a witch." Lucas was worse. 13, a year younger than Ada, but taller, louder, crueler. He called her the Maid, never her name. "Where's the maid? The maid forgot to iron my shirt again. Can someone remind the maid that she's not part of the family?" Once, when she answered back, barely a whisper, barely anything, he smirked and poured orange juice on the floor. "Oops," he said. "Clean it." She bent down, fists clenched, wiping silently as the cold liquid soaked into her skirt. School was no escape. She was enrolled in the community school at the edge of town. It was underfunded, overcrowded, and filled with children who had already learned to mock what they did not understand. Her accent, her skin, her silence, they all became targets. She walked there alone. Marian said her schedule couldn't allow her to drop off both girls. So Nina rode in the car while Ada walked 40 minutes, rain or shine. And she was always late. Not by much. 10 minutes, sometimes 15. But enough to be noticed. The teachers didn't care about the why. They marked her tardy and sighed when she entered. One morning, the headmistress called her out in front of the entire class. "If you can't come on time, maybe you don't deserve to be here." The class laughed. Ada didn't cry. She had learned to swallow that urge. But when she sat down, her hands trembled so violently her pen scratched through the page. In the afternoons, she came home to more work. The laundry, the kitchen, vacuuming. Her back ached constantly. Her fingers developed small cuts from harsh soap. No one asked her how school was. Once, Marianne's husband came home early. Ada was scrubbing the floor. He almost stepped over her. "You're still here," he muttered. Christ, I thought we'd sent you off to boarding already. She didn't answer. She just kept scrubbing. Later that night, she lay on the foam mat, unable to sleep. Her muscles ached. Her chest ached worse. It felt like the air had weight, like she was drowning. And yet, there were moments, brief flashes. A teacher who noticed her essays were written with unusual care. A librarian who quietly slipped her a novel to read. A neighbor who let her sit in their stairwell for a few minutes of Wi-Fi. But they were fleeting. Small candles in a long tunnel. She wrote letters to her mother but didn't send them. She didn't want to break her heart. In one, she wrote, "Mummy, you told me to make you proud. I am trying. But it's hard. Sometimes I think I'm not really here. Just a shadow in someone else's house." Ada folded the letter and tucked it into her school notebook. It stayed there for months. That winter, the heating broke in her small room. No one noticed. No one fixed it. She layered 2 sweaters and still shivered through the nights. She taught herself to hold her breath whenever she wanted to scream. No one ever heard her. No one ever looked. The first time Ada mentioned university, Marianne laughed. It wasn't cruel, not on the surface. It was the kind of laugh that rich women give when someone poor forgets their place. Light. Icy. Full of disbelief. University? For what? Who's going to pay for that? Ada? You think education is a charity project now? Ada didn't respond. She lowered her eyes, hands folded in her lap, as if the desire for an education was a sin she needed to confess. But the idea had rooted itself deep within her, fed not by hope but by desperation. She watched people walking through the city with briefcases, watched girls on the bus holding thick textbooks, heard professors on podcasts and saw job postings on the library bulletin board. And she knew she would not spend the rest of her life scrubbing floors and being forgotten. She waited 3 years. 3 years of scrubbing, folding, walking in the cold, and being called Maid. 3 years of missing meals and swallowing humiliation. Marianne kept saying, "Maybe next year. We are saving up for Nina's private school. Things are tight. Just help a little longer." But in the 3rd year, Ada stopped waiting. She registered for the national entrance exam using money saved from odd jobs, babysitting for neighbors, helping clean the local mosque, ironing clothes late into the night. She studied at the public library, sometimes until the lights were turned off and she had to walk home in the dark. When she passed, she told Marianne, she was stunned that she could do something like that but still composed herself. Together with her husband, they laughed at her, wondering how she planned to get the necessary financial help to go to school. She had expected something from them, knowing she had served them faithfully for years without being paid, but they did nothing. Although they did not want her to leave, they still want their unpaid maid, but her mind was made up that even if they won't sponsor her, she will use school as a disguise to start something with her life. The day she left, it was with just a duffel bag that contained her few clothes, nothing more. They all laughed at her and did not even give her fare. As she was leaving the house, a tear dropped from her eyes, not because she's not happy she's finally free, but she just pitied herself and realized how inhuman the people she has been serving like a maid are. She left with nothing. She took the last train out of the city, her suitcase rattling behind her, her hands shaking from fear, her chest full of something that felt, almost, like freedom. University was no paradise. She enrolled in a public institution in a rough part of the city. The buildings were grey, the dormitories cramped. She couldn't afford accommodation, so she shared a room with 3 other girls and often slept on the floor as she paid less than them all. She took up 4 jobs, sometimes 5. A waitress at a late-night diner, a cleaner at the library, a leaflet distributor, a dog walker. She even helped translate documents for immigrants, using what she'd picked up over the years. She didn't rest. Sometimes she studied in train stations. Sometimes she washed her only bra in the sink and dried it with a hairdryer. Sometimes she pretended to be sick to avoid parties because she didn't have the clothes for them. But she kept her grades high. Always. In her 2nd year, one of her professors pulled her aside. Your essays are better than most native students. Where did you learn to write like this? Ada didn't know what to say. She didn't tell him about the nights she wrote by flashlight, or the novels she read secretly while cleaning the family's house. In her third year, she built a small online tutoring business. Just math and English at first. Then CV writing. Then language lessons. Students started recommending her. By the time she graduated, it had become something more. She registered her business. She built a website. She hired her first freelancer. She was 26. A graduate. A business owner. A girl with no contacts, no capital, no family name to lean on. Just grit, fire, and the memory of every flaw she'd ever been made to scrub. And she swore, quietly, to herself. She would never go back. Not to that house. Not to that silence. Not to the girl who lived like a shadow. She was done being invisible. She was going to be seen. It began with a phone call. Ada was in a meeting with her small but growing team, 5 young women from working-class backgrounds like hers. They were gathered around a single worn table in their modest office, discussing a new client contract, when her phone vibrated. The name on the screen stopped her breath. Marianne. She hadn't spoken to anyone in that house for nearly 5 years. She let it ring out. A minute later, another call. Then another. Then a message. Please. We need help. Ada didn't respond. But that night, after the office lights dimmed and the city fell into the kind of hush only midnight brings, she read the string of messages Marianne had sent. They were losing everything. Her husband's company had collapsed after a corruption scandal. Investigations, frozen assets, mounting debts. Friends were turning away. The private school expelled Nina for unpaid tuition. Lucas had dropped out after a failed drug test. The mortgage was in arrears. The family's name, once spoken with pride, now passed in whispers and pity. They wouldn't have called because what does she have to offer? But a family friend that saw her recently had told them of how she's leading a team that looks promising and may break out soon. And then Marianne said the words Ada had never expected to hear. We were wrong. We treated you badly. We know. But if you can help. Ada didn't reply. She sat by the window, watching the street below. The wind swept plastic bags across the pavement. Somewhere, a woman was laughing in the distance. She thought of her mother. Her real home. The way her siblings' faces lit up the day she sent them new school bags with her first real paycheck. She thought of Marianne's face, the soft disdain, the shallow smiles, the invisible whip in her silence. They wanted her help. But she remembered how they ignored her hunger. How they never heard her cry. How they made her scrub juice off the floor while their son laughed. And now they wanted a seat at her table. The next week, Ada was invited to speak at a young entrepreneurs conference. Her story had begun to circulate. Immigrant girl turned businesswoman. A symbol of grit and grace. The media loved it. The event hall was packed. She stood on stage in a navy blue suit, her braids tied back, eyes clear and calm. Cameras flashed. People cheered. In the crowd, toward the back, Marianne sat alone. Her face was thinner now. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. Lucas was nowhere to be seen. Nina sat beside her, head low, as if ashamed of something she could not name. Ada saw them. She let her eyes pass over them without stopping. When she spoke, she told the truth. Not names. Not vengeance. But truth. I was once the girl nobody saw, she began. The one who walked to school in the cold. The one who cleaned floors so others could step on her. The one who was told her dreams were too big for her skin. The room fell silent. But I kept going. Because I knew, somewhere, there was a place where my voice would matter. So I built that place. People clapped. Some stood. Marianne wept quietly. After the event, she waited near the exit, hoping for a word. A look. Anything. Ada walked past. She didn't speak. She didn't stop. She didn't need to. Because some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some end with dignity. and Ada had finally, fully, completely reclaimed hers. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you.